January 17, 1945. Ardennes Forest, Belgium. The snow falls in silence. Not the gentle silence of a winter morning, but the heavy, suffocating silence that follows gunfire. A young Obergefreiter named Klaus Reinhardt crouches in a foxhole carved from frozen earth, his breath forming small clouds that vanish into the gray dawn. His hands, wrapped in cloth strips torn from a dead man's uniform, tremble as he holds a piece of hardtack, the same iron-hard biscuit his grandfather might have gnawed during the Great War. Around him, the wreckage of Germany's final Western offensive lies scattered across the Belgian countryside. Abandoned panzers with empty fuel tanks, artillery pieces silenced not by Allied fire but by the absence of shells, and everywhere, the gnawing presence of hunger. 50 meters away, across a field transformed into a frozen moonscape by weeks of shelling, an American supply truck idles with its engine running. Steam rises from its hood. The smell of diesel fuel and hot coffee drifts across no man's land like a taunt. Klaus watches through eyes hollowed by malnutrition as American soldiers, boys who look impossibly young and impossibly well-fed, unload crate after crate of ammunition, rations, medical supplies, jerry cans of gasoline. They work without urgency, almost casually, as if the contents of that single truck represent nothing extraordinary. As if more trucks will arrive tomorrow. And the day after. And the day after that. Klaus cannot comprehend what he is witnessing. In his mind, shaped by years of Wehrmacht logistics and Nazi propaganda, supply lines are fragile threads that stretch and fray and ultimately snap. They are vulnerable arteries that bleed out under partisan attacks, crumble beneath winter storms, collapse under their own impossible weight. Yet here, thousands of kilometers from American shores, across an ocean patrolled by U-boats, through ports that should have been bottlenecks, along roads that should have been impassable. Here the Americans have built something that defies every principle of warfare Klaus has been taught. They have built a supply line that does not break. He doesn't yet understand that he is witnessing the death of an ideology. That the truck idling 50 meters away represents not merely superior logistics but a fundamental civilizational advantage that no amount of German discipline or tactical brilliance can overcome. That the can of coffee in an American soldier's hands contains within it the entire productive capacity of a continent untouched by war, where factories run 3 shifts, where farmers till fields unscorched by retreating armies, where railroads operate on schedules rather than hope. Klaus Reinhardt, freezing in his foxhole with a piece of hardtack crumbling in his cloth-wrapped hands, is watching the future defeat the past. He just doesn't know it yet. To understand the magnitude of what Klaus witnessed that January morning, one must travel backward in time and westward in geography, to a moment when American supply lines existed only as pencil marks on planning maps. June 1942. Washington, D.C. The Pentagon, still so new that construction crews work through the night to complete its outer rings. In a third-floor conference room, officers from the newly formed services of supply gather around tables covered with maritime charts, railroad timetables, and production forecasts. The challenge before them is unprecedented in human history. How to sustain a multi-front global war across 2 oceans simultaneously, how to feed, clothe, arm, and fuel armies fighting in North Africa, Europe, and the Pacific while also supplying allied nations whose own production capacity has been devastated by years of warfare. The numbers are staggering. The United States Army alone will require, by 1944, approximately 30 million tons of supplies to reach overseas theaters annually. This figure does not include naval requirements, strategic bombing operations, or Lend-Lease commitments to Britain, the Soviet Union, and China. To visualize 30 million tons, imagine a train stretching from New York to Los Angeles and back again, every boxcar filled with ammunition, rations, medical supplies, replacement parts, fuel, vehicles, and the 10,000 other items an army consumes. Now imagine assembling that train every single month, loading it onto ships, protecting those ships across submarine-infested waters, unloading at ports under potential enemy attack, and distributing the contents to units scattered across entire continents, all without significant interruption. The task appears impossible. The Germans certainly believe it to be impossible. German military doctrine, refined through the rapid conquests of 1939 and 1940, emphasizes Bugungskrieg, war of movement. Armored spearheads drive deep into enemy territory, living off captured supplies when possible, prioritizing speed over sustainment. This approach worked brilliantly when France fell in 6 weeks, when the Balkans collapsed in days. But it failed catastrophically at Moscow in 1941, when German supply lines stretched beyond their elastic limit and winter arrived with the Wehrmacht still wearing summer uniforms, still waiting for winter clothing that sat in rail yards 800 kilometers to the rear. The lesson Germany drew from this failure was not that their logistics system needed fundamental restructuring, but that blitzkrieg must achieve victory before logistics become relevant. Knock out the enemy before your supply lines become vulnerabilities. Win fast or don't fight at all. The Americans, by contrast, study logistics the way other nations study tactics. At West Point, at the Army Industrial College, in civilian business schools now contributing expertise to the war effort, American planners embrace an almost religious faith in what they call the arithmetic of victory. Wars, they believe, are not won primarily by heroism or tactical genius, though both help, but by the unglamorous mathematics of ton-miles, turnaround times, and inventory management. This philosophy is quintessentially American, rooted in a nation that conquered a continent not primarily through military force but through railroads, telegraph lines, and the systematic organization of vast spaces. The Americans look at the Atlantic Ocean and see not an unconquerable barrier but a logistics problem requiring systematic solution. The solution they devise is itself almost military in its precision. Liberty ships, mass-produced cargo vessels built in American shipyards at rates that seem hallucinatory. One ship every 42 days in 1941, one ship every day by late 1942, one ship every 8 hours at peak production in 1943. These ships are not beautiful. They are utilitarian boxes of welded steel, designed not for elegance but for rapid construction and acceptable loss rates. They are disposable in the way that only American industrial capacity makes possible, built with the assumption that some will sink, that losses are factored into production schedules. For every Liberty ship sent to the bottom by a U-boat, 2 more slide down slipways into the water. The Germans are sinking ships faster than any navy in history, and they are still losing the tonnage war. But ships alone solve nothing if ports cannot unload them. Here the Americans demonstrate an almost obsessive attention to infrastructure. Before the Normandy invasion, military planners calculate that capturing a major port will take weeks, weeks during which hundreds of thousands of men will need continuous supply. The solution is both audacious and perfectly representative of American engineering philosophy. If adequate ports don't exist, build them. Mulberry harbors, massive artificial ports constructed in Britain, towed across the English Channel, and sunk into position off the Normandy coast, represent perhaps the most extraordinary construction project in military history. Within days of D-Day, these artificial ports unload more tonnage than the pre-war port of Dover handled in peacetime. When storms destroy one Mulberry in late June 1944, American engineers simply increase throughput at the surviving harbor and begin landing supplies directly on beaches using an endless procession of amphibious vehicles. The supplies keep flowing. And what supplies they are! An American infantry division in 1944 requires approximately 650 tons of supplies daily. This figure represents everything from artillery shells and rifle ammunition to rations, medical supplies, fuel, replacement uniforms, mail, and the endless miscellany that keeps a modern army functional. By comparison, a German infantry division requires approximately 300 tons daily, a figure that seems to suggest German efficiency until one realizes that German divisions achieve their lower consumption rate partly through having less to consume. The American division has more trucks, more radios, more medical capacity, more artillery, more of everything. The German division achieves logistical efficiency through comparative poverty. Consider rations. The German Wehrmacht in 1945 feeds its soldiers on approximately 2,500 calories daily when supplies arrive. These calories come primarily from dark bread, increasingly adulterated with sawdust and substitutes as German agriculture collapses under Allied bombing and labor shortages, from thin soups stretched with potatoes and turnips, from Dauerwurst, preserved sausage that tastes of chemicals, and from ersatz coffee that contains no actual coffee. It is a diet of maintenance, barely sufficient to keep soldiers functional. Many German soldiers supplement their rations with whatever they can forage, beg, or steal from occupied territories. By war's end, this foraging has become systematic looting, with entire divisions surviving partly on pillage. The Americans, meanwhile, construct an entirely parallel food supply system. American soldiers receive approximately 4,000 calories daily, not as a theoretical allocation but as an actual delivery. These calories arrive in standardized units: K rations for mobile troops, C rations for less mobile forces, and hot meals prepared by unit cooks whenever tactical situations permit. A single K ration box contains not merely calories but variety: canned meat, crackers, candy, cigarettes, chewing gum, instant coffee. The box itself is a marvel of packaging engineering, wax-coated cardboard designed to survive rough handling and moisture. An American soldier in a Belgian foxhole in January 1945 eats better than most European civilians. This is not accident or luck. This is the deliberate result of supply chains that function across 5,000 miles without interruption. The psychology of abundance versus scarcity cannot be overstated. When Klaus Reinhardt watches American soldiers unload their supply truck with casual indifference, he is witnessing the behavioral manifestation of plenty. American soldiers complain about K rations, the food becomes monotonous, but they never doubt that more food will arrive. This certainty liberates them from the constant low-level anxiety that characterizes Wehrmacht logistics. German soldiers hoard supplies, hide extra rations, develop intricate bartering systems. American soldiers throw away half-full cans because fresh rations will arrive tomorrow. To German eyes, this wastefulness seems almost immoral. It is also strategically decisive. Fuel consumption provides an even starker contrast. The German war machine runs on synthetic fuel produced from coal through the Fischer-Tropsch process, a technological achievement born of necessity, as Germany lacks natural petroleum reserves. These synthetic fuel plants require enormous industrial investment, consume vast quantities of coal, and even at peak production cannot meet Wehrmacht requirements. By 1944, German fuel production collapses under Allied strategic bombing. Panzer divisions receive fuel allocations measured in days or hours of operation. Tactical decisions are dictated not by strategic objectives but by fuel availability. Germany's final offensive in the Ardennes, the operation surrounding Klaus Reinhardt's foxhole, gambles everything on capturing American fuel depots. The operation fails partly because German tanks run dry before reaching their objectives. American fuel logistics, by contrast, operate at scales that German planners consider fantasy. American forces in Europe consume approximately 1 million gallons of gasoline daily by late 1944. This fuel travels from oil wells in Texas and Oklahoma to refineries along the Gulf Coast, then by pipeline and tanker ship to Britain, across the Channel to France, and finally through the Red Ball Express, a dedicated truck convoy system that operates around the clock, delivering supplies from Normandy beaches to advancing frontline units. At peak operation, Red Ball Express trucks cover a continuous loop of over 700 kilometers, the highway devoted entirely to military logistics. French civilians watch an endless stream of American trucks roll past, one every few seconds, day and night, carrying jerry cans of fuel that represent merely a fraction of American daily consumption. The entire German fuel production capacity for 1 month equals approximately what American forces consume in Europe in 1 week. This disparity extends to every category of supply. Ammunition. American artillery batteries fire support missions with a profligacy that German gunners find incomprehensible. A German artillery battalion conserves shells, calculates each fire mission, knows that resupply may take days or weeks. An American artillery battalion requests ammunition and receives it, hundreds of shells delivered within hours. This difference manifests in casualty rates. American infantry can call for artillery support against any significant resistance, can afford to use high explosives instead of lives. The Germans, lacking ammunition, must use infantry to assault positions that Americans would simply flatten with artillery. Medical supplies. American battlefield medicine in World War II represents a revolution in military healthcare. Penicillin, blood plasma, mobile surgical hospitals, rapid evacuation chains. An American soldier wounded in France has better survival prospects than a civilian in a major American hospital had 15 years earlier. The entire medical supply chain, from pharmaceutical plants in New Jersey to battlefield aid stations in the Hurtgen Forest, functions as an integrated system. Supplies flow forward, wounded flow backward. The system processes hundreds of thousands of casualties without collapse. German military medicine, by contrast, regresses under supply shortages. By 1945, German military hospitals run short of bandages, antiseptics, morphine. Survival rates decline. Wounded soldiers who would live with adequate care die from supply failures. Replacement parts reveal perhaps the purest expression of American logistical philosophy. An American tank or truck or radio breaks down, and standardized replacement parts arrive, not might arrive, not should arrive, but do arrive, within the supply system's normal operation. The Americans mass-produce not merely equipment but every component of that equipment. Factories manufacture replacement tracks for Sherman tanks in quantities sufficient to supply both frontline repairs and theater-level depot stocks. This parts abundance means American equipment stays operational. German equipment, often technically superior in design, sits immobile waiting for irreplaceable components. A broken transmission sidelines a Panther tank permanently because replacement transmissions don't exist. The Americans build inferior tanks but keep them running. In attritional warfare, availability trumps quality. The human infrastructure supporting these supply lines equals the material achievement. The United States Army Services of Supply grows into an organization of over 1.4 million personnel by 1945, more people than many nations field in their entire armies. These soldiers don't fight, don't appear in combat histories, receive few medals. They drive trucks, operate forklifts, staff supply depots, maintain inventory systems, process requisitions. They are the anonymous multitude that makes heroism possible. For every American soldier crouching in a Belgian foxhole, 3 American soldiers work in rear areas ensuring that ammunition, food, fuel, and replacements reach that foxhole. This ratio, 3 supporters for every combat soldier, represents a philosophical commitment to logistics that other nations consider wasteful. It is wasteful only if one loses. If one wins, it appears as wisdom. The Germans, facing this logistical hurricane, attempt responses that reveal both tactical creativity and strategic bankruptcy. Kampfgruppen, battle groups assembled from remnants of shattered divisions, learn to target American supply convoys, hoping to disrupt the flow even briefly. Some successes occur. A fuel convoy ambushed, a supply depot destroyed by artillery. But these are pinpricks against a colossus. The Americans simply send more convoys, build more depots, accept losses as operational costs. The German tactical excellence proves strategically irrelevant against an enemy that can absorb losses and continue functioning. What Klaus Reinhardt and thousands of German soldiers like him gradually realize, as 1945 grinds forward, is that they are not fighting an enemy army so much as fighting an economic system. The American soldiers they face are merely the cutting edge of something vastly larger, a continental industrial base running at full capacity, protected by oceans from enemy attack, organized with ruthless efficiency, and devoted entirely to prosecution of war. Every American soldier carries with him the productive output of a nation of 140 million people. Every German soldier, by early 1945, represents an economy collapsing under strategic bombing, a population exhausted by years of total war, and supply lines that have not merely frayed but disintegrated. The symbolic weight of coffee becomes, for many German prisoners, the moment of recognition. Coffee appears everywhere in American hands. It steams in canteen cups at frontline positions. It percolates in field kitchens. Instant coffee packets, another American innovation, developed specifically for military use, fill K-ration boxes. To Germans who have drunk ersatz coffee made from roasted acorns and chicory for years, this abundance of real coffee represents something beyond mere luxury. It represents a civilization so wealthy that it can ship millions of pounds of non-essential comfort items across an ocean, through a war zone, to frontline troops, without considering this an extraordinary achievement. The coffee is symbolic because it is functionally unnecessary for military operations. Soldiers could fight without it. But American soldiers don't have to fight without it, and that difference contains within it the entire explanation for the war's outcome. Klaus Reinhardt, captured during the collapse of the Ruhr Pocket in April 1945, experiences American abundance firsthand. The POW camp near Reims operates with a casual efficiency that bewilders him. Meals arrive on schedule, not lavish meals but adequate ones, more food than German civilians currently eat. Medical care appears unlimited. Sick prisoners receive treatment, antibiotics, attention from doctors who have supplies to work with. The camp itself, housing tens of thousands of prisoners, represents merely one small node in a logistics network that feeds millions without apparent strain. Klaus, waiting in meal lines, begins to understand something that Nazi ideology had insisted was impossible, that democracy, messy and inefficient seeming, had outproduced the regimented efficiency of the Third Reich. That individual freedom had generated more collective power than totalitarian organization. The realization is devastating because it invalidates the ideological foundation for everything he suffered and endured. The Pacific Theater presents the same dynamic in even more extreme form. Japanese military logistics, influenced by samurai traditions that glorified hardship and scorned elaborate supply systems, prove catastrophically inadequate for sustained modern warfare. Japanese soldiers on Guadalcanal, New Guinea, the Philippines, starve in their thousands not because American forces cut supply lines, though they do, but because Japanese logistics never adequately supplied them in the first place. Japanese military culture considers elaborate attention to supply matters unworthy of warrior spirit. This attitude, noble in Bushido philosophy, equals suicide in industrial warfare. American forces advancing through the Pacific encounter Japanese positions where soldiers have resorted to cannibalism, where entire units have died of starvation, where defense collapses not from enemy action but from systemic supply failure. Against this self-inflicted Japanese logistical catastrophe, American supply lines stretch across the Pacific with the same relentless efficiency demonstrated in Europe. The distances are greater. San Francisco to Manila is nearly 7,000 miles, but the principle remains identical. Ships, trucks, the endless organized flow of material. American forces in the Pacific consume supplies at rates that Japanese planners consider physically impossible. An American division on Luzon operates with more supply tonnage than the entire Japanese army in the Philippines receives. This disparity manifests as combat power. American units fight with unlimited ammunition, call in artillery and air support without resource constraints, evacuate wounded to hospital ships equipped better than Japanese hospitals in Tokyo. The material advantage is so overwhelming that tactical brilliance becomes nearly irrelevant. Japanese soldiers fight with suicidal courage and achieve nothing because courage cannot defeat artillery shells that arrive by the thousands. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki represent, among many other things, the ultimate expression of American logistics. The Manhattan Project, this vast secret enterprise consuming billions of dollars and employing hundreds of thousands of workers, succeeds partly because American logistics can support such an endeavor while simultaneously supplying two multi-theater conventional wars. The industrial capacity exists to build atomic weapons and Liberty ships, to produce both uranium centrifuges and Liberty ship engines, to fund both nuclear research and the Red Ball Express. No other nation fighting in World War II possesses the economic surplus to even attempt this. Germany pursued atomic research and abandoned it partly because resources didn't exist. Japan never seriously considered the possibility. The Soviet Union required American Lend-Lease supplies to sustain basic military operations. Only America can afford to pursue atomic weapons as, essentially, a side project. The post-war interrogations of German and Japanese officers reveal a consistent pattern. When asked why they believed they lost, most don't cite specific battles or tactical failures. They cite arithmetic. The Americans had more of everything. More ships, more planes, more tanks, more trucks, more fuel, more food, more ammunition, more everything. This numerical superiority, initially dismissed by Axis powers as mere quantity versus quality, proved decisive because the Americans sustained it. German tanks were better than Sherman tanks in almost every measurable way. Better armor, better guns, better engineering. But for every German tank destroyed, replacement difficulties often meant permanent loss. For every Sherman destroyed, another Sherman arrived from depots that held thousands. The quality versus quantity debate, which occupies so much military analysis, misses the fundamental point. American logistics ensured both quantity and acceptable quality, delivered continuously, across thousands of miles, without failure. The strategic implications extend far beyond World War II. The Marshall Plan, rebuilding Europe through massive American aid, operates on logistical systems perfected during the war. The Berlin airlift, sustaining an entire city by air transport alone, succeeds because American logistics planners approach it as merely another difficult problem requiring systematic solution. The Cold War military posture, with American forces stationed globally, depends entirely on supply lines that span the world. The Gulf Wars, fought with supply lines stretching from American bases through 10,000 miles of ocean and desert, demonstrate that the lessons of 1945 remain relevant 80 years later. American military power rests ultimately not on weapons technology or tactical doctrine but on the unglamorous capability to deliver supplies anywhere, continuously, regardless of obstacles. Klaus Reinhardt, released from POW status in late 1945, returns to a Germany that no longer exists. The Third Reich has not merely been defeated militarily but erased ideologically. The rubble of German cities, the millions of dead, the occupation zones, all testify to the cost of miscalculation. In his rebuilt life as a teacher in Dusseldorf, Klaus sometimes speaks to students about the war. He tells them about the cold January morning in the Ardennes, about the American supply truck idling 50 meters away, about the smell of coffee drifting across the frozen field. He tells them that Germany lost the war not in Berlin or Stalingrad, but in the arithmetic of supply lines, in the capacity to deliver millions of tons of material across oceans without interruption. He tells them that freedom and efficiency are not opposites, that democracy can outproduce tyranny, that the messy plurality of free societies generates powers that rigid hierarchies cannot match. The lesson is uncomfortable for some to hear, in any era. It suggests that ideology matters less than production, that noble sacrifices cannot overcome logistical mathematics, that wars are won in factories and freight yards as much as battlefields. It is an unglamorous truth, lacking the dramatic clarity of decisive battles or brilliant generalship. But it is truth nonetheless. The Americans won World War II partly through heroism and tactical skill, but primarily through supply lines that ran thousands of miles without failure. They won through ships that sailed on schedule, through trucks that drove through nights, through the anonymous millions who loaded crates and drove forklifts and processed requisitions. They won through coffee that arrived in foxholes, through fuel that reached tanks, through ammunition that never ran out. They won through logistics. The snow falls differently now, decades removed from that January morning. Falls on monuments and cemeteries, on rebuilt cities and replanted forests, on a continent that learned through catastrophe what Klaus Reinhardt learned in his foxhole, that abundance is a form of power, that systems matter more than symbolism, that the capability to deliver supplies across oceans measures civilizational achievement as surely as any cultural production. The coffee cooling in an American canteen cup on a January morning in 1945 represented everything that Nazi ideology denied, that freedom and efficiency could coexist, that democratic capitalism could outproduce totalitarian discipline, that the future belonged not to those who glorified hardship but to those who systematically eliminated it. The American supply trucks still idle in memory, engines running, exhaust steaming into cold air. They idle not as historical curiosity but as testament to a truth larger than any single war, that the distance between ideology and reality is measured in miles of supply lines, in tons of delivered cargo, in the relentless arithmetic of logistics that determines which nations rise and which nations, despite courage and sacrifice, fall into the frozen earth of history.